But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Hello, everyone. My name is Al Person. You can contact me at pastor@mascot.church, which is my email address, or in the comments below if you like. If you interact with this video in any way, YouTube might recommend it on to somebody else. That's what we always say. I'm not sure if that works or not. We're not sure what we're going to do with the channel, how we're going to grow it, or whatever going forward. Thank you for joining me today. We had a huge thunderstorm overnight, which normally I sleep right through, but for some reason it woke me up, and very, very odd. So just that little bit seedy, but that's okay. So that passage that we looked at today, or that quote, comes from Matthew 24. And there is a significant amount of confusion about this. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. That's a King James quote. We'll be looking at that in the ESV. Now, the reason that it brings confusion today, there's several different problems with it, several different things which we're going to address. If you're a longer-term partial preterist or a preterist or whatever who believes that the majority of prophecy, or like myself, prophecy is fulfilled, this one isn't a problem. But many people haven't tackled it, and they haven't really gone through and had a look at the implications of it. People see this section of Matthew 24 as many people do, as largely unfulfilled. They'll say, "Oh man, whenever this thing begins to happen, we hope it's not on the Sabbath." Well, that therefore must mean, if this has not yet happened, that somehow the Sabbath must still be kept, right? So Sabbatarians, people who insist that we're required to keep the seventh-day Sabbath, will often refer to this passage and say, "Look, this is a future thing, and the Sabbath is still important," and so on. And I understand that. I understand where they get that from. But that's a sticky minefield that I'm not going to enter into yet today, but we do want to address this one. The first thing that we need to get our head around is really the rules of journalism: who, what, where, when, why, how, all of those questions that we need to ask. We just need to ask them about every passage we're reading. And we're going to have a look at this and try to get a little broader context, and then find out why this was significant to Jesus' audience on the day. And remember, we're kind of in the post-exilic books. That is, the books after the exile. The people had returned from the Babylonian captivity. See my earlier videos on Ezra and so on. And those books cover events that happened after the exile. So we have three prophets, Zechariah, Haggai, and Malachi. And then we have some very important people. We have Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and a number of others brought up and referenced in those books who are very important. We see in the beginning of the Second Temple era many themes that originate there, that at the end of the Second Temple era, which is prophesied and spoken about in the book of Revelation, we see those same themes revisited and often unwound. We see the two witnesses that come from here unwound in the book of Revelation. Gog and Magog that comes from here unwound, or re-referenced, if you will, not always unwound, but referenced typologically in the book of Revelation. We see the building of the temple motifs, the horses and so on and so forth, the going out through the land, again referenced, but sometimes in a negative sense, in the book of Revelation. So the book of Revelation is really the end of the physical temple era, is what it's talking about. The specific epoch, I love that word, the specific epoch that's being referenced is the Second Temple era. So the First Temple era ends when the Babylonians destroy the temple. Then there's a 70-year period, after which the Second Temple era begins. Ezra goes back and he starts worshiping. They start rebuilding the temple. Nehemiah comes later, rebuilds the wall. A lot of many of the things that were in common worship at the time of Christ, because the Lord came at the very end of the Second Temple era. A lot of those things, the structure of the temple, the synagogue, and so on, how things worked, originated from Ezra and Nehemiah. They started then, and they were brought in. A lot of the literature was there. The temple libraries were built. It's a really fascinating time period. The beginning of the Second Temple era that I talk about here, those books I just mentioned, occurred in the Persian period, which is the second of the four empires talked about by Daniel. The Second Temple era ends at the end of the Jewish-Roman era. Rome goes on after that, but the Jewish-Roman era, that's the end of the eschaton, occurs then. So we have this period of several hundred years. At the end of these post-exilic books, the last one is Malachi, and Malachi ends with a sense of judgment, and then there's 400 years of darkness until God picks up the scene again and starts to work. Yes, he cares for his people. Wonderful things happen then, but in terms of prophetic announcements, 400 years of darkness. So the Lord is telling his people, he's telling his audience that when this event happens, you don't want to be there on the Sabbath when it takes place. Let me take you to this passage here and pop it up on the screen, and we'll just have a look at it. This is from Matthew 24. Here we go. And this is 15. So when you see the abomination of desolation, oh man, there's so much about this abomination of desolation. And I notice my audio is going a bit low here. So abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place. Let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in the house. Be careful here. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for the women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world, has not been from the beginning of the world until now, and no, and never will be. And so this is the period the Lord is talking about, the tribulation period that is to come. And was to come, is past. All right. Now, he's talking to his audience, and he's talking to people who are in Judea. It says, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. All right. So that's specific instruction in Judea. If we're supposed to flee if this is a current reference or a future reference to us, if we are supposed to flee when the abomination of desolation occurs, where do mountain dwellers go? I live in Sydney, Australia. Where do I go to flee? This really isn't, the ocean? I don't know. But you see, he is setting this up in a time, in a context that makes sense. He's talking about the city of Jerusalem being under siege. And he's talking about Judea being under siege, which it was, and his own audience saw this happen. Some had died by then, but the apostles passed that on, and some of the apostles actually saw the beginning of this take place, the wars in Judea and so on. So he's talking about this. He's saying, listen, when you see the abomination of desolation, the you there is not us, it's that audience, those in Judea, when you see it. Now let's come back to this about flight. He said, pray that your flight is not in the winter or in the Sabbath. And so we'll just address the winter for a moment. There's no problem these days fleeing in the wintertime. That's no problem. Even in ice cold Canada, where I live, you can still get away in the wintertime. Why would that even be an issue? I don't get it. And as for the Sabbath, why would that even be an issue either today? And then it talks about let he who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And other translations say rooftop. Or let he who is in his field not turn back to take his cloak. He's saying, get out quickly. Do this. Well, what's really happening here? How could this possibly be us? How could it possibly be our time? I'm saying it can't be. This passage is often dragged by people who don't understand this into our time or even into our future, which is it's an anachronistic problem. It's out of time, out of other things. The who here, he's talking to a local audience. Among those people are people who are going to see him crucified. He's talking to an audience who are going to, among those people some are going to see the outpouring of the Spirit in Pentecost. Some are going to see the great times of peace and flourishing that happens during the Pax Romana. Some are going to see the beginning of the fall of Jerusalem, and some will live through it. And they're going to identify this. They're going to see the abomination of desolation. They're going to see this time happening when they need to flee. Right? So this is really fascinating. All right, what about the Sabbath day? Well, if you have a look at the picture and the image that I had here, I'll pop this back on. I asked AI to help me, and I've got to lose my addiction to it. But I said, hey, listen, Copilot, give me a picture of a man about the time of AD 70 with a camel with a big burden of things trying to get into a city where the gates are locked. And it gave me this, and I thought, wow, that is not too bad. So what's going on here? And where do we get this from? The problem with the Sabbath originates from Nehemiah. And Nehemiah was one of the great people that God raised up to build first the temple, Ezra, and then the city walls, Nehemiah, at the beginning of the Second Temple era. at the when the exiles had returned. And Nehemiah had a problem, and we're going to read about the problem that Nehemiah faced. I'm going to put that up on the screen here, and we'll come back here and have a look at this. This is the last chapter of the book of Nehemiah. Okay, so again, he's in the Second Temple era, the very beginning of it. He's rebuilding Nehemiah's job is to rebuild the walls and get Jerusalem back in order. Ezra's job was the temple, get the temple functioning. The two knew each other, they worked together. It's a fascinating story. So as Nehemiah's book closes, verse 15 of chapter 13, in those days, I saw in Judah people treading the wine presses on the Sabbath. Okay, this was not permitted. And bringing in heaps of grain and loading them on donkeys, and also wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them on the day when they sold food. Tyrians also, who lived in the city, brought in fish and all kinds of goods and sold them on the Sabbath to the people of Judah in Jerusalem itself. Look, he's got this exclamation mark, right? Then I confronted the nobles of Judah and said to them, what is this evil thing that you are doing, profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers act in this way, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Now you are bringing more wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. As soon as it began to grow dark at the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I commanded that the doors should be shut and gave orders that they should not be opened until after the Sabbath. And I stationed some of my servants at the gates, that no load might be brought in on the Sabbath day. Then the merchants and the sellers and all kinds of wares lodged, the merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. But I warned them, and I said, why do you lodge outside the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time, they did not come on the Sabbath. Then I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves and come and guard the gates to keep the Sabbath day holy. Remember, this is also in my favor, O my God, and spare me according to the greatness of your steadfast love. So this is the great Nehemiah praying. Well, what's going on here? It was completely forbidden to buy and sell on the Sabbath. You can see those references. In fact, if I remember, I should stick them in the bottom of this in the comment section a little later, but otherwise you can find them if I fail to do that. Completely forbidden. It was completely forbidden to trade in any way or to work on the Sabbath. You know, a Sabbath keeper is going to have to not buy anything, not light a fire, not do anything, stay in the home, not do homework for children, not do stuff like that. Concentrate on Torah only, never move. Keeping the Sabbath according to the Old Testament law is extremely difficult, intentionally so. Now you say, well, Brother Al, what do we do with that? Well, the scripture teaches that those who are in Christ are in the rest of God. That's the traditional Christian position. You can't keep the Sabbath without the sacrifices. It's not possible to do that. It was a requirement. And so all of these sabbatical requirements, Sabbath requirements, including the 7-year resting of the land, the Jubilees and all that, were all intrinsically tied up with the Sabbath, none of which can be kept today because there isn't a temple, there aren't sacrifices, none of those things. There is, however, a way to keep the Sabbath, that is, to enter into the rest of God. And I believe the New Testament is clear on that point. Nevertheless, this was not that time. This was Nehemiah's day when the Sabbath had to be kept. And Nehemiah said, listen, I saw people trading in Jerusalem. They were buying and selling in the city. And people from Tyre, remember we talked about Tyre and Sidon, who lived there. They were trading in the city. This cannot be. People were coming in and out of the city. So what did I do? I closed the gates. That's it. No more. Those who waited outside the gates, I said, no, listen to Nehemiah. I'll lay my hands on them. Then he charges the Levites to say, protect this thing, keep it pure, don't let the Sabbath be defiled. So this was the Second Temple era, and during that time, Jerusalem's gates were closed on the Sabbath. Now this makes sense. The Lord is talking about an event, the abomination of desolation that takes place where? In the temple. Where was the temple? In Jerusalem. He said, when you see this, get out. And his specific instruction about not on the Sabbath has a couple of points here. Number one, you couldn't leave the city on the Sabbath. That was the other. But also there were restrictions on travel all over Judea on the Sabbath. It was called the Sabbath day's journey. That even adds to the complexity of that. That should get a video. We should talk about that and have a look at that. And so I'm saying, look, you won't be able to travel. They'll stop you. They'll They'll hinder you. You're not going to be able to do this. Otherwise, you're able to do so, which is really fascinating. But specifically back to Jerusalem, there was no way out of the city on those days. The gates were shut. This is a really interesting look at, first of all, that Second Temple era history, and secondly, how the prophetic question, the prophetic statement that we read from Matthew 24 could not possibly be applied today. It's not for our time. It was for their time. It was for the audience then who saw the abomination of desolation. And all of these things, the stage was set for this entire a Jewish model of worship and the temple system and everything back in the Ezra and the Nehemiah days when the temple was rebuilt and the city was rebuilt. It's a wonderful time period in history. It's something that we need to study and to keep our eyes open to, and there's a lot to learn there. All right, so why did the Lord say that your flight should not be on the Sabbath? Because, well, there were restrictions on travel on the Sabbath in those days, do not exist today. And if you were in the city of Jerusalem, you wouldn't be able to get out because Nehemiah had closed the gates. My name is Al Person. Come back again next week.